Hello, everybody. My name's Henry. Many thanks for coming along to this session today. I hope it offers some use. Um, I've called it the carbon conundrum, mainly because it's a little bit of a brain splurge that I've not quite worked out myself. And I'm hoping that this presentation either sparks some ideas for you, offers some options or alternatives or some things to think about when considering planning your next event. I want to look at the carbon conundrum in terms of live events, virtual events, and hybrid events, and I want to drill down into those event formats and how we can use information and measurements in order to inform our decisions um, in a way where we can reduce the amount of carbon that events emit. Hopefully, that's what I'm going to achieve. That's the goal of this presentation. Um, a little bit about CrowdComms. So I'm the head of business development at CrowdComms. CrowdComms are an event tech provider based in the UK. They've got offices in Australia, in the US, and in Ireland. We support live events with mobile apps, on-site badging kiosks, on-site filming, hybrid broadcasting. We also support virtual events as well, and registration. And coming out of the pandemic, we also support hybrid events as well. We started in 2011 purely as a mobile app provider for live events. We diversified our product offering in 2018, supporting on-site badging. Then when the pandemic hit, because we had a web-based solution alongside our native-based app, we were very quickly able to pivot clients to the virtual world, emitting the content via a stream. We service about 2,500 events a year now, and it puts us in quite a unique position whereby we can observe the data from those virtual events, and we can take measurements from them in order to help inform decisions. So a little bit about me. So as well as being the head of business development at CrowdComms and loving event tech, I'm also a keen mountaineer and climber. Now, I don't class myself particularly as a sustainability expert, and I'm not a very good climber either in any capacity. But what I have noticed is change in the environment that I've been playing around in. This particular image here, on the right-hand side, you've got the Abisko National Park in Sweden, which I've been going to for about 5-6 years. This time of year, there's usually a glacier in that photo there where you can see my feet and a cup of coffee. And I'd noticed by going into this landscape, watching it change. On the left-hand side is the Cairngorms in Scotland. Again, over a 10-year period, I noticed it where the environment that I was once climbing at a certain time of year, I was no longer able to do that. And so in my mind, and with all of the information that's available to us now, the science that's out there, seemed very clear to me that climate change and human impact was clearly having an effect on my personal environment in this particular situation. Now, I am not an expert, and I'm not going to go into any of the facts or figures or details, and nor am I saying that the events industry are the worst at this. There are many other industries, obviously, which emit far more carbon than the event industry. But I think as an industry, we do have a responsibility to focus on change, and as individuals, we again have that responsibility. And what difference can we make, albeit so small? It is a change that I was willing to pursue, and platforms, virtual platforms, over the pandemic, where you attend an event via a desktop computer or mobile phone, and you didn't have to travel to the event, are very useful tools. They're tools which still emit content, and they have a degree of immersive capability. But there's also, and I'm going to break up in a moment some statistics around how much carbon a live event produces and how much carbon a virtual event produces, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits and limitations of both. But this slide is just concluding that, and you don't need me telling you it, it's a very big problem, and it's not just traveling to the event, although that's what my focus is going to be. There's event waste and infrastructure and different forms of energy which release carbon. But I'm going to focus on travel because it's the clearest way that I think we can make a real difference, and it's something a really important consideration when deciding which event format that you would like to choose. So just want a quick, entertain me for a moment, quick raise of hands on who flew here to Barcelona, who flew here today. Fantastic. As expected, the majority of us did. So to give you a little idea on that flight, I mean, you wouldn't have all travelled from the UK, but a flight from the UK to Barcelona is the equivalent of about 0.1 tonne of carbon. So a return flight is 0.2 tonnes of carbon. That is the same amount of carbon emission as powering a home, an average home in the UK, for about 10 days. A fully grown tree takes about 4 years to absorb that amount of carbon, and you can charge 53,000 iPhones twice over on that amount of carbon emission as well. So it's not a small thing to palm off. In total, for an event like IBTM, for instance, where there's about 10 to 15,000 of us, that equates to over 3,000 tonnes of carbon, ultimately. That amount of carbon can power a 750 houses populated in a village for an entire year. So this 3-day event here, the amount of carbon we're emitting is the same as what a village will emit over a year. Let's put that into the context of a virtual event, for instance, and we can. I'm not suggesting IBTM should ever go virtual. I love being at IBTM. I love the live experiences. I wouldn't have been able to drink far too much wine last night if I was in a virtual experience. But the US Environment Agency, there are a lot of variables in this figure because it depends where your data servers are stored, if it's in Norway or if it's in Morocco. The cooling of those data centers requires different amounts of energy, obviously, but an average to consider is about 0.2 tonne of carbon. So if you're putting 100 gigabytes of data into the cloud, whether that be photos that you're uploading, documents, the amount of emails that you send, 100 gigabytes is the equivalent of about 0.2 tonnes of carbon. Now, when you're streaming a virtual event, you put data into the cloud. A 15,000 attendee virtual event over 3 days with the amount of content that roughly we've got here, it's probably, someone might quote me differently on this, 30 hours of streaming content over 3 days to 15,000 attendees. That's the equivalent of 2,400 gigabytes or 2.4 terabytes. If you equate that to the calculation of 0.2 tonne of carbon per 100 gigabytes of data, the entire carbon emission of a virtual event running IBTM is the equivalent of 4.8 tonnes of carbon. And now, when you compare that to over 3,000 tonnes of carbon, it's incredibly vastly different. Even if my calculations are off here and there in terms of doubling the amount of content that we've got at this event, it's still humongous, the difference of comparing a live event to a virtual event in terms of the carbon emissions. Now, I am not saying that we should run all of our events virtually. There are clearly things that a virtual event cannot provide. It can work brilliantly. I've attended many virtual events and I've absorbed the content and I've been able to network and book one-to-one meetings and I've received push notifications, but I've also been less immersed, let's say. I've been unable to share, I've been unable to network in an online environment which I thrive off in a live environment. So arguably, um, virtual is not as immersive. The adoption rates are far lower for virtual, almost 70% lower as well. But ultimately, we want to and need an environment that stimulates social interaction and creates meaningful connections. So it's about being selective. Now, I flew here today. I'm not, an angel. I love travel. I really like live events. I enjoy face-to-face interaction, and I enjoy spontaneous networking. Now, for me, wanting those things from a live event, does that make me selfish? You know, there are some events which are very well suited to a virtual environment, like I don't know, a GDPR conference. I'd rather sit on my bed in my pants and watch it virtually. Sorry if there's any data protection officers in the room who love a GDPR event. Whereas, a music event, I need to see that in a live environment. An event like IBTM, I want to be able to see that in a live environment as well. But are there elements where we can be selective over where we choose to be virtual and choose to be live? A hybrid event, for instance, is a great alternative. When you're planning your event, is there a key team or key group of attendees that need to have those live experiences, to have that degree of spontaneous networking, whereas other attendees can actually just absorb the content remotely? And I suppose that's about understanding your event's objectives and aims, and then making a formula whereby, okay, I've got a 1,000-person attendee. In fact, I only really need to send 200 of my core scientists to this event to actually develop this particular product or talk about this development, and 800 of those, they just need to absorb the information that we're getting from the event. There are many different types of hybrid events that you can run. I've seen all different types of formulas for it. I've seen a 3-day event where the first day is completely virtual, the second day is a live experience, and the third day is a virtual experience. So that's an attendee group being virtual, live, and again virtual. Or I've seen it whereby you literally treat the audiences differently. You've got a remote audience and you've got a live audience. So it's about understanding and being selective about what is best fit for your event, but whilst keeping in mind the live experience massively creates a lot more carbon than the virtual. So really, it's about firstly, once you take this format, you can then start measuring the impact that each audiences are creating, and you can start working out what is the best fit for your event with which still adheres to the quality of outcome that you're trying to achieve, but also hits to your sustainability goals and objectives. Another thing that you can do is obviously offsetting, and there are some fantastic organizations here today and out there that I would encourage you utilize, whereby you think, actually, we cannot have IBTM in a virtual capacity. It needs to be in a live capacity. We are going to fly 15,000 people from around the world here. Okay, well, how can we offset that? And I would encourage anybody to speak to the event sustainability organization ILA in the UK, speak to an expert like Tony, who will be able to inform you exactly some organizations out there that can help offset your carbon emissions when it's necessity to have your event in a live capacity. And then it kind of brings me on to sort of innovation and what's next. And it can seem a little bit dystopian at times. The metaverse being a prime example that I think is going to impact our lives quite a lot over the next 10 years, whereby, okay, so what are we losing out on a virtual experience? It's not as immersive as a live experience. I don't feel as connected with the audience or the people around me. So the metaverse, I don't know if anybody here has put on a pair of those VR glasses, but they're pretty insane. The first time I put a pair on, I was on a roller coaster, and I genuinely had that sensation of going up the roller coaster and then being thrusted into a ride-like experience. And the metaverse will create a digital environment where we feel connected to the people around us, where we feel that we are immersed in the situation, where I can take expression and human interaction that is otherwise missing in a virtual experience that we're having at the moment. Um, and I think that we will spend a lot of time in the metaverse. Um, Another statistic, why not? About I think it's about 50% of time of 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK. About 50% of their waking hours is spent on the computer. I don't really see a difference between the computer world and the metaverse, apart from that our current solution just has terrible graphics. So we are just improving that experience, which is almost inevitable, and people will spend the majority of their time in there. And obviously, you are reducing that transport piece by having a metaverse environment. I feel it's a little bit dystopian because of films like Surrogates. I don't know if anybody's seen that with Bruce Willis, whereby it's a metaverse that goes so far that you've got a bodysuit on and you can feel things within that environment in your own personal space, and perhaps it will go that far. Or will innovation in technologies actually stop us having to go down that route? So, for instance, I would like to think that in 20 years we are flying planes on hydrogen rather than carbon-emitting fuels. And if we have elements like that in the future, then we won't need to take into these considerations. But these considerations that I'm bringing up are, how can we affect that carbon emission now, rather than in 10 years, in 20 years, where we're not waiting for these technologies to arise, where as an events industry, we don't need to limit our attendees' experiences by pushing a virtual scenario. A little bit of a conclusion, if you can call it that. Like I said, it is a bit of a brain splurge about this conundrum that I find myself in terms of when I'm advising clients, when one of their main goals is sustainability around the event, saying, should we go virtual, should we go live, how do we do hybrid? I think work out your key objectives. That's the main thing. Are you just emitting content? What is really required from your event? Do you really want to encourage networking and sharing of ideas and content outside of just a presentation like this one that can just be filmed and watch on demand? Have a look at the hybrid offering and look at your event and determine, actually, does this audience need to be flown to Rio de Janeiro for 4 days? Or can actually we only select certain attendees to do that? Of course, think about your travel options carefully, and it's not just travel, it's also, the merchandise that we're using, it's your diet as well, in terms of, having a vegetarian diet option instead of a meat. So there's lots of elements that you can actually think of just to reduce that carbon for that live event. But if you take anything away from this presentation, apart from that you may think that Henry's very, very disorganized, is measure your events. That was the thing that I would really say, is measure the amount of carbon that your event is emitting, whether that is a live event or a virtual event. Isla, again, I would like to reference them, who have built a tool in the UK called Trace. Trace is a fantastic software which allows you to input in different details about your event, and it will work out the carbon emission. And it's only once we've got that data, that measurement, that you can really start to implement change and inform the decisions that you're gonna make. That is my presentation. So if anybody has got any questions around, you know, how you're running your events and maybe any negatives you've experienced from a virtual scenario or a live scenario, then please feel free to share. More than happy. But like I said, I'm not an expert in sustainability. I simply come from an event tech background with a concern around the environment.
Well, first of all, a round of applause, though, for Henry for putting that together. So thank you very much, Henry. Obviously, we've got the Slido technology there if you want to use it. I have a roving mic as well, if that helps. If anyone wants to talk to Isla, one of them is standing right over there by the actress there. But if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to run away.
Hi. Henry, why do you think people aren't already measuring this stuff?
I think it's because there are so many variables, and I also think it's cost and time and team members. I mean, for us to get some of these very small amounts of data essentially here, we had to create a sustainability committee in our organization. That, you know, that takes people's time. We don't have the resources at the moment to hire a team purely focused on sustainability. So I think that that's one of the main limitations.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Very inspiring presentation. And I want to just emphasize to the question here, because what we saw in terms of sustainability, there is a big gap between intention and clear actions. And really what's happening, there is a lot of tools available. Some of them are free, some of them are, you need to pay for them. But more importantly, a lot of corporations, they don't have any resources or budget mechanism for this. So when we ask them, are you willing to evaluate your events and to include sustainability? They say yes. So here is the solution, but you need to pay a certain amount of it. Then they say no. So, and one of the questions, please, because I know that it's really hard. There is a lot of event management platform. It's really hard to evaluate the carbon footprint that they generate. And one of the main questions is with regard to metaverse. A lot of people, they are saying it's really energy consuming, but we don't have any tool to evaluate what metaverse impact will be in terms of sustainability. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point. In terms of measurement of the metaverse, I mean, at the moment, I go by that stat of 0.2 tons of carbon per 100 gigabytes of data. That's from the US Department of the Environment Department. I think that stat will change, and like I said, there are many variables on that, but it is the biggest source of carbon emission from a digital environment is how much data we're putting in to the cloud and how active our servers are working and how much we need to cool them down. And that's the biggest emitter for the metaverse. Your first point as well around the resources, or when you're trying to convince a client saying, you know, sustainability, but there's a cost element to it, virtual is cheaper. That's what I would say. So virtual is massively cheaper than live, as long as you want to make sure your quality of outcome remains the same. We don't want to reduce the quality of outcome of our events by choosing to go virtual. I don't think, and I think we can do both, as long as you are carefully looking at that the objectives of your event and where you can work in a virtual capacity.
That's great. I would also like to plug a session tomorrow, which is on semiconductors, which are actually going to have a massive impact on the cooling mechanisms around servers and things like that. So if you want to know about that, then tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Sorry.
Hi. Yeah, along the veins of when it comes to pricing, I come from Sustainable Travel International, by the way. So it doesn't have to be expensive. I think it's a lot of lack of awareness. Actually, there's a lot of measuring tools to measure, you know, the flights. Hotels and venues are also measuring the impact already. So in that, they should offer that as a free service. So for example, we with only $500, we can measure the carbon footprint of your event. And when it comes to offsetting, it's also not price prohibitive. For example, the recent Reuters conference, it was about 200 people. It's about 0.75 metric tons of CO2 per person on average, and that cost about $13 to offset for that one person for the entire venue, and that's including transportation, hotel, and the venue itself. So it's not cost prohibitive. I think there's a lot of lack of awareness. So anybody can actually do this, and it's to create more awareness, and there's more and more tools out there to help you measure your carbon footprint and offsetting as well.
Yeah, great point.
Thanks very much for that point.
Great point.
Is there any other questions? If not, we may be releasing you into the wild again a tiny bit earlier. Let's do that. Well, let's finish with a nice ripple of applause for Henry for bringing that together, and have a great show. Hopefully you'll be back tomorrow as well, where there's lots more content on this stage.
Thanks very much.